Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am here today to ask a question. Who is afraid of Toni Morison? This is the novel Beloved, written in 1987, and it won the Pulitzer Prize in Literature, perhaps the most prestigious award for an American novel. It is set after the Civil War. It is the story of Setha, her daughter Denver, who are living in a house haunted by the ghost of a baby. And into this house comes a man that Setha knew when she was a slave 18 years ago. The man is named Paul D. And Paul D is able to exorcise this baby ghost from her house. But after the ghost is gone, a woman shows up in her life named Beloved. She is the age that the baby would have been had the baby not died. And some people go so far as to say that this is a horror novel because it deals with a ghost or a potential ghost. I'm going to disagree because the horror of this novel is not the horror of the ghost. It is not a Stephen King type of horror novel. It is the horror of examining the past and the horrors of slavery. Because this baby ghost was created right out of the horrors of slavery and what slavery can do to people. And taking it from there, you get the examination of what is great literature. Because the ghost of this book really is not the ghost of a baby. It is the ghost of slavery and how people deal with slavery and perhaps what could be done with our memories of slavery. Now, I read this book about 15 years ago as an audiobook narrated by the author, and I thought it was very good. I liked it, but I did not love it. I reread it just recently in this paperback form, and I am upping my view of this book, saying I now think it is a great book because it makes readers examine themselves and examine what we have done. So I read this, I reread it because Beloved has become a political dog whistle in the state of Virginia. A number of years ago, when Terry McAuliffe was governor between 2014 and 2018, there was a student in a high school in Virginia who was asked to read Beloved for his class. And he got very upset with this novel. So legislation was passed in Virginia saying students could opt out from reading books that they thought would disturb them. And it was passed by the Virginia State Legislature, but it was vetoed by the governor, Terry McAuliffe. Now, in Virginia, governors are limited to one consecutive term. So he left in 2018, and the deputy governor became governor. But what happened is in 2021, he wanted to rerun for a governorship. And he was the Democratic nominee. And the Republican nominee, Glenn Youngkin, brought up this vetoed legislator saying students didn't have to read Beloved if they thought it would disturb them. And this became an issue in the governor's race. And it was a political dog whistle, calling all the people who were afraid of Toni Morison to vote for the Republican nomination for governor. And he did win. Virginia had been reliably turning Democratic for a number of years, and now it is going to the Republican governor. In part because the new governor, Glenn Youngkin, said students will not be forced to read books that make them upset anymore. He would enforce that law. Whether he continues on to enforce that law, I don't know. But that was his political dog whistle to get people to vote for him. Getting people to be afraid of Toni Morison. And I have to ask myself, why are people afraid of this novel? This does everything that literature should do. It makes people examine themselves. It gives them a story that they can talk about. It has issues that may not be explicitly clear and have a clear directive, but it's powerful. And the governor says students will not have to read that anymore if they don't want to. And my deep love in life is writing and literature. So I was rather shocked and appalled that the voters of Virginia went with this political dog whistle. So I reread Beloved. And I have to say, this is a very good novel. It hits everything literature needs to hit. Now, I'm not going to say that it's my favorite story of all time. It will not be my favorite novel, but it's a very good one, and there's no reason that students should not be required to read it. In previous years, The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane was a staple of American high schools. And as I was reading in a Crane biography recently, that was because during that era, people believed it was an anti-war novel. And whether The Red Badge of Courage is an anti-war novel or not is open to some debate. But that is the reason it was assigned to high school students. Now, race in this day and age is that important issue that the anti-war issue was back then. People need to examine race in America because a lot of people are getting very upset about what is going on and what people fear. Now, I am a middle-aged, retired computer programmer. I'm Caucasian, but I am not afraid of Toni Morison. I am not afraid to read Beloved and examine it and look at the harsh issues that Toni Morison wants us to look at in this book. She asks us, how, as human beings, could we have treated the African-American human beings in such a deplorable way as to enslave them? And why are people nowadays still afraid to look at that? Now, I don't have an answer for that. I am not one of these people that fear this book. But I'm going to read a brief quote from the book. And this is the thoughts of a character named Stamppad. And this is what Stamppad thinks. Even the educated colored, the long-schooled people, the doctors, the teachers, the paper writers, and businessmen had a hard row to hoe. In addition to having to use their hands to get ahead, they had the weight of the whole race sitting there. You needed two heads for that. White people believed that whatever the manners, under every dark skin was a jungle, swift, unnavigable waters, swinging, screaming baboons, sleeping snakes, red gums ready for the sweet white blood. In a way, he thought, they were right. The more colored people spent their strength trying to convince them how gentle they were, how clever and loving, how human, the more they used themselves to persuade whites of something Negroes believed could not be questioned, the deeper and more tangled the jungle grew inside. But it wasn't the jungle blacks brought with them to this place from the other, livable place. It was the jungle white folks planted in them, and it grew. It spread in, through and after life. It spread until it invaded the whites who had made it, touched them, every one, changed them and altered them, made them bloody, silly, worse than even they wanted to be. So scared were they of the jungle they had made. The screaming baboon lived under their own white skin, and the red gums were their own. And this is basically saying that the people who are afraid of letting their children read Toni Morison are afraid of the jungle inside black people. And this jungle is the jungle that they planted inside. It's their own imagining of what is in the black people. And that is very powerful. And that is a reason why more people should be reading Beloved. And there is a scene in this where Setha is talking to Paul D. And Paul D mentions that a long time ago, he had seen her husband. And he said, "Did you stop and talk with him?" And Paul D said, "No." And Setha got upset and said, "Why didn't you stop to talk with him?" And Paul D says, "I couldn't. I had a bit in my mouth." Now people should stop to think about that. At one time, it was acceptable to put a bit in another human being's mouth. I remember reading a fantasy novel, and there was a slight digression by the author, but he talked about how cruel it was to put a bit in a horse's mouth. How much crueler could it be to put a bit in a human's mouth? And what these people want to do by saying you don't have to read Beloved is putting a bit in people's minds so they cannot understand this. They cannot communicate what they learn in this book. And that is why people need to read this. I have gone on too long. Thank you very much. And my one thing about this is on books. Just read the books. Read Beloved, read other books. Doesn't matter what books you like to read. Read them. Don't let governors and legislators tell you not to read a book. Just read it. Thank you.